DH-60 Gypsy Moth came from the legendary de Havilland stable and was the first truly affordable light aircraft for private use.
The Gypsy Moth was a very successful light aircraft used by a number of adventurers who did long-distance flights, and a lot of people were setting up flying schools as well as transport companies. So the Gypsy was used quite successfully in that regard.
Contact.
With perfect timing, the DH-60 came along just as flying clubs were getting off the ground. The two made a perfect match, giving access to flight for more and more people. It even had folding wings, so you could tow it home and store it more easily. In the 1920s and 30s, the Gypsy Moth was also the workhorse of a generation of daring explorers, like Amy Johnson, who was the first woman to fly from England to Australia.
And this is not that long after the end of the First World War. Aircraft development is still moving along fairly quickly, but the instrument panels are still incredibly basic. So you've got the basic instruments for altitude, turning, speed, tachometer revs, and that's all well and good, provided the weather is fine and it's daylight, but if it gets really heavy rain or it's dark, that's where it gets really interesting.
This particular aircraft was built in 1929. It came out to Australia and it was used in New Guinea for a fair amount of time. Then eventually it came back to Adelaide in the early 1940s.
While in New Guinea, it was badly damaged when it hit boulders after landing. It was repaired, then cracks were found after a heavy landing. It was hurriedly patched up so it could be flown out as the Japanese closed in.
It went to the Department of Education, who used it as an instructional airframe.
Over 800 Gypsy Moths were built, and there are 40 still flying, including 6 in Australia.
It went to the Birdwood Mill Museum, which was the museum prior to it being the National Motor Museum. It was there from 1965 until it was delivered to the museum, South Australian Aviation Museum, in 1991, and we've had it since then.
This aircraft is one of 5 on display in museums around the world.
The left-hand lower wing is uncovered mainly to show people what the construction technique was.
The Gypsy Moths were of all wooden construction, typical of the time.
You can see that the wooden ribs and spars are all made to make a box frame, which is very strong but very light.
Later versions did have a fabric-covered metal frame.
The airframe itself has to be braced with wires to make sure that the structural integrity is kept throughout the flight regime. Without the wires, the wings would tend to move, flutter and upset the lift capability of the wings.
Now when you picked up your Gypsy Moth, you would have shelled out about £650. That's about $90,000 in today's money. Now considering a Cessna will set you back anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000, it really was exceptional value. De Havilland painted the aircraft's wings and tail surfaces. You could have any colour you liked as long as it was silver. That left the fuselage for you to paint. In the UK, they tended to go with whatever their flying club colours were. In Australia, we ended up with this rather nice two-tone finish.
The Gypsy Moth left a legacy in the form of the next famous biplane to emerge from the Staglang factory just outside of London.
When you say the word de Havilland Tiger Moth, people recognise that as one of the most famous products from the de Havilland Company, but this Gypsy Moth is the predecessor of the Tiger Moth, so it's basically the same airframe shape, different engine layout, but it was the initial development of the Gypsy that led to the successful development of the Tiger Moth.